discussing the fundamentals of conflict management. As we learned in Module 1, conflict is an inevitable part of our lives, as it affects us personally and occurs in the world around us. This is why it is important to understand what conflict is, how it occurs, in order to be able to effectively manage it. As explained in Chapter 1 of the Griffith and Goodwin textbook, conflict involves competition between two or more individuals or groups who are interdependent and have competing interests. We have also learned that there are different ways in which people approach conflict. This will be the focus of my presentation today. There are 3 approaches to conflict that people generally adopt, including a power-based approach, a rights-based approach, and an interest-based approach. Throughout the presentation, I will elaborate on each of the individual approaches and then provide a real-world example of each. A power-based approach to solving conflict always depends on who has the most power. When applying a power-based approach to conflict, a resolution, or the end of a dispute, will be a result of the superior party exerting their power over a weaker adversary in order to force compliance with their terms. To put it simply, the more powerful individual uses their power to ensure they get the results that they want. As you will see through my case study, power-based approaches can cause damage to individuals and relationships between individuals. The example I'm using to demonstrate a power-based approach is an American criminal case known as the Central Park Five. This took place in 1989 when a 28-year-old woman jogging through Central Park was brutally raped and almost killed by an unknown perpetrator. This case started receiving a lot of public attention, and the state was under a lot of pressure to convict someone for the crime. As a result, 5 boys between the ages of 14 and 16 were accused of the crime. Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Antron McCrae, and Corey Wise were brought to the police station where they were interrogated aggressively for countless hours without lawyers or parents present. The investigators coerced them to falsely confess to the rape and attempted murder of the woman. The investigators used violence, fear, and manipulation tactics against the boys to force them to confess. At many points, they were told that if they just admit to doing the assault, they would get to go home. This was absolutely not the case. The abuse of power came at the cost of their innocence. Even though DNA samples proved that the boys did not commit the crime, the court convicted them on the basis of their confessions. Unfortunately, race was another factor in the power dynamics of this case. The boys were treated as inferior because of their skin, and the police acted without regard for their rights under the law. A rights-based approach to resolving conflict depends on rules, policies, laws, procedures, or similar frameworks from which parties can make appeals to what is right. Parties engage in a contest of wills to persuade a third party of the justness of one's position over the other adversary. Although this approach is generally nonviolent, they can still be very contentious. The example I am drawing on for a rights-based approach is an American court case that involved LGBTQ rights against discrimination in the workplace. It began with a woman named Amy Stevens, former manager at a funeral home, when in 2013, she was fired after telling her boss that she was undergoing a gender reassignment surgery. Stevens sued him and argued that she was wrongfully terminated on the basis of her transgender status. The lower court ruled in her favor. Following this, a landmark decision was made by the Supreme Court to include gay and transgender rights into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, where discrimination in the workplace is addressed. Interest-based approaches to conflict focus on the underlying needs, concerns, and desires of both parties, and recognizes the importance of finding solutions to address these concerns. This is a collaborative model whereby parties seek to understand one another's positions in the dispute and work together to find an acceptable outcome. This is exhibited in a case involving the royal family that happened earlier this year. Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan Markle, announced that they would be stepping back from their duties as members of the royal family. Despite how difficult and controversial their decision to resign was, it is clear that a collaborative model was present, as seen through the Queen's statement, where she says, "Today, my family and I had very constructive discussions on the future of my grandson and his family." She goes on to say that she is entirely supportive of Harry and Meghan's desire to create a new life, and although she would have preferred them to stay as working members of the royal family, she respects and understands their wishes. In a similar manner, Harry and Meghan expressed their respect for the Queen by saying, "We intend to step back as senior members of the royal family and want to work to become financially independent while continuing to fully support Her Majesty the Queen." When looking at these statements, it is clear that there is a mutual respect between the parties, and that thorough negotiations took place to ensure that everyone's needs and concerns were addressed, demonstrating an interest-based approach to conflict. After reviewing the case studies in this presentation, you can see the ways in which these theories play out in the real world, and the clear distinctions between the different types of approaches. When comparing the examples of power-based and interest-based approach that I used here today, you can see how the type of relationships between parties or individuals can impact the way in which conflict is approached and in turn resolved. Although my case study demonstrated a negative effect for a power-based approach, it's important to understand that this is not always the case. My presentation has also demonstrated how rights-based approaches have the ability not only to resolve conflict between individuals, but how they can inform important legal decisions and create positive change for wider society.